Roe v. Wade was enacted in the early 1970s. It was a product of the women's liberation movement at that era, the 60s and the 70s, that came about at the same time as the Black Power, the gay liberation, the Vietnam War movement, all of those movements of that era. And essentially, it had a law across the United States that gave access to abortion. But what's happening here is when it's overturned, what it means is that regulation, legislation related to abortion relates then to state legislatures. And it's a very real problem. And I'll explain why that is. Right now, 13 states already have very restrictive laws related to abortion. Another 12 states are in a situation where they will be triggering laws that are exactly that, totally restrictive, if indeed Roe v. Wade goes down. And I think that, as you well know, Canada has a very, very long border with the United States. We've always worked in conjunction with movements in the United States on a whole range of issues, this included. And when you look at who is going to be denied, it's so clear. The racialized component, the question of people in low-income areas, these are the ones who are vulnerable. That is who is going to be in a situation where they will be in very, very, very dire straits. And I think that a study came out just recently showing that the numbers of women, 47% accessing abortion, 47% are white, 49% racialized. And the figures of those in poverty are extraordinary, and so we know who's going to be affected. And the anti-choice has had a strategy both in Canada and the United States, though it's been more effective south of the border, where they have been, we've called it anti-choice by stealth, state by state by state. They've been raising the issue, they've been taking it on. The far right has assisted in this, the evangelical churches, the Catholic Church, and they have taken control of state legislatures in so many areas, passed extremely restrictive barriers to abortion, and obviously have also been trying to really stack the courts. And as we know, the Supreme Court, that was very successful. And the thing that we are always concerned about, and we've had struggles and discussion with women in the United States and others who are in this movement, about the response of women's organizations and broader organizations like the trade union movement. Women's organizations like the National Abortion Rights Action League, National Organization of Women, National Organization of Traditional Organizations in the United States have unfortunately taken up a strategy of linking their future and their present to the Democratic Party. It's extremely concerning. For example, when the Texas ban took place a while ago, it should have amassed a huge reaction across the U.S., but both NARAL and NOW, they did very little. It took the Women's March grouping, which did that huge march when Trump was elected in Washington, brought 500,000 people. We went down from Canada, as we have many times in the past, and it was not at its strength. But things happened. But unfortunately, if you go on the websites of NOW, NARAL today, what you see is, yes, they're decrying what's happening. There's no doubt about it. But what their strategy is, donate, so we can elect Republican senators and Congress people during the midterm elections. And this is such a problem. And I think it's a huge debate that's going on. Demonstrations did take place last weekend, but again, they were locally organized, and they brought out many young people from racialized communities, from university campuses, so many. But the strategy just is not there right now. And I know even very progressive people are talking about setting up legal funds, and legal funds are important. Mutual aid, helping those who are going to be in states that they cannot access the procedure to get to a state where they can, or to possibly come to Canada, hugely important. And in Canada, I will say, in years gone by, in our most recent overturning of this, it wasn't recent, 30 years ago, but the most recent federal approach to the abortion question in this country took place in '88, where a movement overturned the federal abortion law. And it was so critical. And of course, at that time, when it was hard to access, we were helping women. I myself and others, we brought women to the United States. We created networks with clinicians, medical physicians, et cetera, across the border, all across from British Columbia to the Atlantic provinces to Ontario. We would go to Buffalo, New York State. But the thing is, we didn't see that as the solution. We knew there had to be a political solution. And in Canada, we developed a whole different strategy. We looked at what's going on in the United States. We looked at what's going on in other parts of the world. And we felt there was a mass movement that was incredibly important. That's what had to happen. That's what we chose to build. And we did do that. And by connecting with the trade union movement, going to conventions, going to conferences, and getting the strong support of the trade union movement, from the steelworkers to public sector to building trades to the Teamsters, they all came on board. Faith communities from many, many different backgrounds, racialized organizations, student organizations, and hundreds of thousands of people were able to get involved in mass mobilizations, national days of action, and fought what was a law that was racist in its application, class biased in its application, and we were able to do that. And I'm not saying that we won everything. The fight is still on, but this is the type of movement that has to take place in the United States. And so what we're seeing is somehow counterposed mutual aid to mass mobilization. And that cannot be the case. And we've had a long time in which we have connected with organizations in the United States, mostly local groupings. We're doing it again. We know that, as I said earlier, our border goes right across the northern part of the United States in a province like Ontario, where I'm situated. Detroit is right across the river from Windsor. And Detroit, a Michigan state, in the state of Michigan, it is a northern state. It was the heart of the trade union movement in the United States for so long. It looks like it may well have one of these more restrictive laws. And the whole question is, how do we assist? Absolutely, we assist if we can to get people across that border. But the key thing is building a mass movement. And I think that is where the U.S. movement has gone awry. It depended so much, hanging its hat on the Democratic Party to protect those rights. And even now, when the rights are about to fall, they're looking to the midterm elections as somehow the salvation. So we've had, as I said earlier, a lot of cross-border solidarity. Operation Rescue, when they tried to shut down the clinics in the United States by blockading them and trying to shame those trying to access abortion, they did the same thing here. We went down to the United States. People came up to Canada. We had a situation where after the law had changed, the clinic that was set up, which was the symbol of resistance to this unjust law, it was firebombed, destroyed, firebombed. We had a huge demonstration, and activists from Buffalo, from New York State came up to show their solidarity with us. That is the kind of solidarity that is so critical internationally. And I think that the people in the United States have to feel that their struggle, and it's going to be a huge struggle. It's a critical struggle because people will die. I mean, I'll just give you one example. After Roe v. Wade, later in the 1970s, the Hyde Amendment was passed. And what it did was take away Medicaid, which is funding for people, low-income people, et cetera, for their health care. It refused to allow for abortion to be covered. This is the type of thing that's been going on for decades. And with these laws coming into effect, more people will die. There is no doubt about it. It's a hugely important issue. And the cross-solidarity that we can give is so important. And we will do all we can to assist the building of movements in the United States to take this on. And I will say, and I'll end on this, within the Black community, in the past, groups like the Black Women's Project, today, Sister Song and others, they are the voices of those who are being denied. They are leading the charge against this. And I think that leadership, the working Black leadership we need from the unions, is what's going to turn this around. So thank you very much. And I'm looking forward to hearing the rest of the presentations.
Perfect, Carolyn, thank you. And 1 minute under, amazing timing as well. And thank you for outlining the situation in such a great way. Awesome. Well, over to you, Sarah.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Carolyn. I think the response to the threat to Roe is likely to be articulated in three major ways. The first is obviously through legal and legislative measures. And this is something that is often presented to us as the only way to resist attacks, these attacks. But Carolyn's talked about how actually the opposition posed by the Democrats is clearly insufficient in resisting the current attacks. I think we have to act now like women's lives depend on this, because actually they do. And it's not all women, really. It's working class women will die in droves if Roe is overturned. And like Carolyn said, you know, the attacks on Roe came right from the start, really. The Hyde Amendment passed just 3 years after Roe came into being. It underlines the sort of grim reality of reproductive health care, you know, that it is a class issue. The backstreets abortions that women were accessing or having, they were reserved for working class women, weren't they? You know, if women had money, even when it was technically illegal, they were able to get doctors to sign off on the procedure. Anti-choice bigots have always wanted to overturn Roe v. Wade, just like they want to overturn the 67 Act that allows abortion in some circumstances in Britain. But even in the US, there's such a strong pro-choice majority. You know, like Carolyn said, they haven't felt confident enough to go quite for the federal ruling in the same way that they're going for it now. I think even now, something like 2/3 of Americans don't want to see Roe attacked, you know, fundamentally got rid of in the way that it looks like it might be later this summer. But I think the attacks also matter in a much broader sense about what sort of society we're living in. You know, anti-choice bigots are sort of, they're salivating, aren't they, at the prospect of taking women's choices away for them. Because for them, it's not just about abortion, is it? You know, it actually represents a much wider ideological attack about a woman's place in society. You know, they want us out of the workplace, don't they? They want us back in the home, they want us raising families and chained back to the kitchen sink. And the Democrats, you know, these group of people who claim that they're the sort of the effective opposition, they're people who try to convince us that the way to kind of bolster abortion rights is to get enough of them into office. But that's clearly not enough. I mean, these attacks are happening directly under Joe Biden's nose, a man who, you know, until 2 weeks ago couldn't even bring himself to say the word abortion, you know, until the Supreme Court document was leaked. He'd never said the word abortion in office. You know, the second reaction is what Carolyn's talked about, you know, this sort of direct action, the new underground abortion network that's kind of being developed in the US through activists. You know, women are scared, and we've good reason, I think. You know, people are working out they're arming themselves with the knowledge and the equipment necessary to kind of perform these, you know, these procedures themselves. But like I said, this isn't some sort of abstract academic debate about the sort of philosophy of autonomy, about when life begins or all the rest of it. This is actually, it's real, isn't it? Women's lives are at risk. And if anyone wants to, you know, read about what this means for the lives of women, poor women, they should have a look at the accounts of women's lives, you know, before Roe came into being. People pretend, or the anti-choice bigots pretend, like abortions started with this legislation, didn't it? But we know, of course, that's not true. Ending an unwanted pregnancy is, well, you know, I read something that they found documents that abortions have been going on for thousands of years, basically, you know. And what makes us human, isn't it, is our ability to control our lives, to shape our own physical functions. You know, it's treated so differently to other types of healthcare, isn't it? You know, if we had diabetes, we'd take insulin. You know, if our hearing isn't great, we'd get a hearing aid. You know, women have the ability, and more crucially, the right to sort of control our own fertility, but they're desperately trying to row those rights back. You know, and it's not just abortion, is it? It's about access to reliable contraception, which is something that has really shaped women's lives over the last changed women's lives over the last few decades. Now, anti-abortionists, anti-choicers like to argue from the moment that life begins at a certain point. you know, that they're fighting for the lives of human beings. But we would argue that actually women are human beings. Women are human beings too, and they deserve to make decisions about their own life, their own body, and that is the most primary. That is the primary thing. So socialists, we see abortion as a personal decision that a woman gets to make by herself. I was in a meeting the other day and someone said that although he wasn't against people making their own choices, maybe women needed more expert advice when they were seeking abortions. But I think women are the experts in those situations. They're experts about their own life and their own decisions and what they want. Incidentally, most of the women seeking abortions are actually already parents, so they know what the reality is if they continue that pregnancy. They're not left in any doubt what that means. We think abortion should be free. We think it should be readily available to those who want it. And we think it should be taken out of the hands of doctors and lawyers, politicians, and put into the hands of women. But the lives of women who endured these backstreet abortions, you know, you read horrific tales, women turning up to hospital with wire coat hangers still hanging out of them, others of dying long, slow deaths from something like sepsis. Some were left with life-changing injuries from douching themselves with bleach. But actually, we don't need to cast our eyes too far back to look at what abortion bans mean, do we? Because I don't know who here remembers the name Savita Halappanavar. She was a young woman who died of sepsis in a hospital in Galway, Ireland in 2012 because she was denied an abortion. Her husband was told, this is a Catholic country, as he begged for an abortion to save Savita Halappanavar's life. She took several days to die. She was only 31 years old. But her name wasn't forgotten because there was a groundswell of fury after the news of her death broke, which brings me, you know, to another strand, I suppose, of fighting these attacks, which I think is the most effective way, and it's through building our anti-choice movement. So this means throwing ourselves into the battle for abortion rights, both here, Britain, you know, and elsewhere. So it's really good that there was an abortion rights demo in London last week. It was really good that there were demos across the US. But like Carolyn kind of said or alluded to, they weren't big enough, were they? They weren't widespread enough. We need more. We need deeper. Because if we look through history, the biggest changes come directly as a result of the strength of the movement in the streets and in the workplaces. So in the US, you know, it means tens of thousands of people marching for the demands around, you know, raised by the women's liberation movement. You know, people who were demanding not just abortion on demand, but also equal pay and free childcare. You know, can you imagine those things even now? I mean, some of these things are getting worse. Childcare is getting even more expensive now than it was kind of 50 years ago. And the biggest attacks to abortion rights in Britain are ones that have been consistently beaten back by unity, by ordinary people arguing that their trade unions, you know, from the shop floor to the top of the union, took up these issues as class issues, something that affected everyone, you know, in the working class, and something that should be defended on that basis. Because this is not a sort of something that it happens on the fringes of society. You know, in Britain at the moment, 1 in 3 women will need an abortion, you know, in their lifetimes, and this is something that you barely hear even mentioned or talked about at all. So I think pointing to these examples that we've talked about the attacks, you know, like the Corrie Bill, was it 74, the Corrie Bill, you know, the attacks in 1990 to try and reduce the length of time that women are able to access abortion, a recent legal challenge actually to try and prevent women from accessing abortions in some cases. You know, this is not about living in the past. This is about, you know, if only we could talk about fighting for abortion rights as something that happens in the past, frankly. It's something that actually it's about using examples in the here and now to show how people have won major victories. But we can look at some even more recent history and remember the sort of marvellous victory in Poland 2 years ago. I think it was 2 years ago. You know, there a right-wing government wanted to virtually ban abortion for any reason at any point in gestation, but it was met with a sustained wave of protests across Poland in kind of unprecedented numbers. I think around 100,000 people marched through the streets of Warsaw, which I think is about 6% of the population of the city. You know, even in Ireland, a place where abortion rights seemed unthinkable, even a generation or two ago, you know, Ireland, people in Ireland scored a massive victory 3 or 4 years ago when a majority of the population voted to repeal its restrictive part of its constitution that prevented abortion. But I just want to finish by thinking more broadly about how we can win more victories. Because I think we need to think about how we make our anti-choice majority as combative as possible. Because like Carolyn said, Roe v. Wade, the 67 Acts in Britain, you know, these what came out of wider social movements that were serious about demanding women's liberation. Because if every person tomorrow decided they were going to campaign for abortion rights, I would be absolutely delighted. But it's about far more than just one issue, because what socialists and feminists and others were fighting for 50 years ago is so much a part of our lives now as they were then. Like I said, the demands for abortion are so relevant, but so are the calls for equal pay, so are the calls for free childcare. Sometimes when we talk about this, we talk about how women today are, you know, we're not worried. My generation of women, I don't think are worried about the glass ceiling. I don't think we're worried that we're going to sort of ascend to the top, but not quite. I think actually most of the women in my generation are worried about the sticky floor. You know, low paid work, crap housing, hugely expensive childcare, rubbish paying jobs most of the time. You know, of course, this all comes in a deeply sexist society that includes objectification of our bodies, you know, these attacks on abortion rights, the sort of wave of the epidemic of sexual violence against women and girls. So I think it's important to remember that our struggles are interlinked. So, you know, the people that are fighting for abortion rights now are, you know, maybe a few years ago they were on the climate strikes. Maybe in a couple of years they'll be the sort of trade unionists, you know, of the future. So it's not about sort of hiving off and creating a militant reproductive rights movement that fights on a single issue, but rather having the argument about women's bodies and women's lives at the centre of that argument as a sort of part of the battles in the fights ahead. And finally, I just want to say that if these attacks go ahead, which they're likely to, this attack on Roe goes ahead, it will bring ordinary people in confrontation with the state. So it matters how we organise. It matters if a huge defence campaign exists for those people who will be prosecuted for spreading information on how to administer certain types of pills, or through directing people to services and all the rest of it. You know, or if there are cross-border solidarity, you know, it matters if people are there to facilitate that, to defend people, you know, and all the rest of it. So these battles are important. So we need to get fighting fit and prepare to claw back the terrain that the anti-choices want to grab, not just on abortion rights, but on everyone at the top of society who wants to bring women to heel. That's it, Sarah.
Thank you, Sarah.